Welcome, everyone, to the Pediatric and Adolescent Committee of the OFC, Oncofertility Consortium, our very first semi-annual virtual meeting. We, as a leadership group, thought that it would be nice to have a mid-year meeting by Zoom instead of just having a once-a-year meeting in person at the OFC meeting. If you were previously a member of the PIN, you are in the right place. One of the things that we did early on is to talk about changing our name to sort of align with the other committees, the female committee, the male committee, and we were the Pediatric Initiative Network, which was just some people were wondering, what does that really mean? So we will now, you'll see information from the PAC, or the Pediatric and Adolescent Committee of the OFC. Okay, so, there we go. Okay. So we're going to meet from 12 to 1, and this is our agenda. I wanted to, we've had a couple of other name changes, and I want to go over the current structure of the PAC for you, so you sort of understand where different activities are going on and the names of the different groups. I wanted you to know who is actually in the PAC leadership team. And you may remember last year before the meeting, we asked for people to either be nominated or self-nominate if they wanted to be on the leadership team. And we were looking for 12 people, and then we were going to hold elections, but we actually only had 12 people who wanted to serve. So that worked out very well. We will then, after I sort of orient you to the different people who are on PAC leadership in the committees, we will go through the different committee updates. Here's another change that happened. The first committee used to be called the Best Practice Committee, and now we're going to call it the Clinical Practice Committee. And they will be presenting for about 15 minutes. Kari is going to present a new process for projects that want to have PAC endorsement. So she's worked really hard on developing this process, and she's going to share that with us. And then Kari and or Seth will provide updates on current projects, the AMH Lit Review, the AMH practice paper, the updated risk stratification, and then talk about other projects that aren't necessarily, don't fall into the PAC endorsed bucket, but are umbrella projects that are coming out of the Clinical Practice Committee. Research will then present for 5 minutes. They're going to talk about work on the database. A nice webinar that was held with PAC and the Basic Science Committee. The Education Committee will then present for about 5 minutes on webinars and the library that they've been working hard on. And then that's only 30 minutes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to split into breakout groups. So you will get to choose whether you'd like to go to the Clinical Practice Committee breakout group for more in-depth discussion of what's going on there, or the research group, or the education group. Okay, so this is our current structure. So again, the Pediatric and Adolescent Committee of the OFC, we have this Clinical Practice Committee, and we have a special group of projects that are endorsed by PAC and are sort of helped along and shepherded through by the PAC, and then clinical practice umbrella projects, research projects, education projects, which we've talked about, the webinars and the library. And I think it's important to realize that there are mentors available for all of these different kind of projects if you are in need of a mentor. So I thought it'd be nice for you to see who your leadership group is. So I'm the chair. Allison Close is the vice chair, and she's waving. And the past chair is Lena Nahata, and each of us hold this position for 2 years. When you look at the Clinical Practice Committee, the current chairs are Kari and Seth. Kari, is Seth here? Oh, it's okay. You can just
He's not here today. Unfortunately, he's on service and said he had a mediastinal mass coming in, so he's a little tied up.
Okay. And they have been really doing a lot of work since November. And then research is Veronica and Maggie, and they too have been pulling together some nice webinar, which I hope Maggie will talk about, and some other projects. And then under education, it is actually Holly, Anthony, and Allison. So I didn't put your picture down twice, Allison. I hope that's okay. But also I really like what they're doing and really targeting, trying to do at least 3 webinars a year. And then actually trying to organize this library and making PAC papers findable in a lot of other dimensions. And actually Allison and Lena have worked hard on revising our website, updating our website. Our at-large members are Tyler, Gina, and Mari. So this is your current PAC leadership group. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kari. Kari, I don't know. I guess I'm advancing your slides. You'll just have to say go. Okay, here you go.
All right. Hello to everybody. Again, it's good to see everyone virtually. I know Lillian already alluded to this idea that we're going to have a new project proposal structure. So you'll see a lot of words on this slide, but let me sort of go through this. So again, we are now the Clinical Practice Committee. And part of this is we really want to focus on what aspects do we need to think about that is going to change clinical practice, what ways can we improve clinical practice. And I think clinical practice is really a fairly large umbrella. And so sometimes there are projects that sort of fit into that, but are sort of loosely associated. So, you know, that sometimes can be in sort of this umbrella project idea. And we don't necessarily want every single project to specifically say this is the stamp of how the Pediatric and Adolescent Committee will actually recommend doing X, Y, or Z. And so this is why we have a couple of different projects. But with that and how we think about projects coming into the Clinical Practice Committee is we actually want to put a lot of thought in these up front to make sure that we've done our due diligence to make sure it is appropriate to really be endorsed by the PAC. But also we want to make sure that we are thinking about all of the aspects that we need to in developing these projects to make sure that they are appropriate and are strong science and have a very high likelihood of being published in the future. So to introduce this idea, you know, we are going to now have a sort of a more formalized structure for project proposals that will be different than just sort of sending an email or off the cuff suggestions of, hey, let's look at this. And part of this will help us keep track of and vet projects. So as these requests come in, we can actually keep a list, and maybe sometimes things are ready for prime time right now, but will also allow us to revisit that in the future. Having this project proposal, like I mentioned, ensures that we'll meet scientific standards. We want to make sure the subject matter and any recommendations that we give from the PAC is saying that this is the way we should do this is within the appropriate scope. And we want to make sure that this is a project we can take on, that we're actually able to take on and has been appropriately thought out and warrants PAC engagement and support. So this will in the future allow us to attach language that suggests that these are supported by or reference the PAC, akin to, you know, reports from the COG or things like that. So the overall plan is that these project proposals will be submitted to the Clinical Practice Committee chairs. And then after we sort of look at them and decide that, yes, this should move on, we present this to the greater PAC leadership that allows a vote as to whether this is a clinical practice project that moves forward or not. We'll look at it sort of a schematic of this later on, but we really feel like right now, knowing that we are all in different parts of the world, that it can be hard to sort of coordinate all of these projects. So realistically, we really only have the bandwidth to support 0 to 2 PAC endorsed projects per year. So we will be putting a lot of thought into which things we take on. As I mentioned, we will be developing specific language to reference the PAC in clinical practice and publication. This is just an example of what this may look like. The use of anti-Müllerian hormone in female childhood cancer survivors by oncofertility specialists, a project from the Pediatric and Adolescent Committee of the Oncofertility Consortium. Next slide. So the first sort of step of this is going to be the assessment of fit for a PAC endorsed project, and whether this is a good fit for clinical practice. So this is going to entail just really a short form that is emailed to the clinical practice chairs, currently myself and Seth. And that will really just include a working title, the sort of current list of authors or the working group that's going to come together to work on this, and the clinical question to be asked. It is possible that someone may have an individual idea and may have all of these sort of fleshed out, except for really the authors and working group. And part of the benefit of having the clinical practice chairs and the PAC leadership is that we can also help bring people together with the appropriate expertise that may be helpful to work on this in the future. So again, once we have sort of looked at the title, the clinical question, and say, yeah, this sounds like a really good project to move forward, we will sort of respond back to that author or collection of authors and say, please put together a proposal. And then the next plan would be for the author or authors to put together that proposal. And then once that goes back through us, we'll submit that in total to the chairs of the PAC Clinical Practice Committee and then the greater PAC. So we're actually going to have a planned 2 deadlines a year. You'll notice the first one coming up this year will be in December, which will be nicely primed after our oncofertility meeting in person. But our targets are really in June and December, recognizing that it takes a lot of time to actually put these together, and will be concrete periods of time for the clinical practice chairs to actually look at things sort of together and decide whether we're moving forward on 1, on 2, or on 0 projects. The goal will be to get feedback in 2 to 4 weeks, including the clinical practice chairs, as well as the PAC or PAC chair or the vice chair. And then if approved, you would have 12 weeks to submit a concept. And we'll actually look at what the concept entails in just a moment. And again, 1 to 2 concepts a year will be approved for these projects. So in terms of the concept process, this is really sort of making this simplistic, but you may have a research idea and submit that to the clinical practice chairs. And the clinical practice chairs may say that this won't be moving forward as a PAC project. That doesn't mean that it's not a good project. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to pursue that personally or with a group of other people. It just means it may not be appropriate right now, or it may not be appropriate for this group to actually endorse. But if we say, yes, please develop a concept proposal, again, you'll have some time to do that. And once that's completed, it would come back to us, then be submitted to the PAC clinical practice chairs. We will then say, yes, we've looked at this, we've reviewed it. Let's submit it back to the PAC leadership for final approval. And then the goal obviously will be that the concept will move forward as a PAC project once that final approval comes in. So once it goes to the clinical practice chairs, there may be a time where it sort of turns back to the authors to add edits or any new considerations that came from there. That same may be true from the PAC leadership that may have additional comments or considerations that were not proposed by the clinical practice chairs. And it's possible that after submitting to the PAC leadership, again, it may be determined that this just is not appropriate at this time or for this project to move forward as a PAC project. But we hope that putting the effort into this process will allow any individual investigator to actually have that ready to go to pursue by themselves or with a small working group outside of the PAC. So in terms of the project concept proposal, this will definitely feel different, I think, for anyone who has otherwise been a part of PAC projects where we haven't had a formalized process. We're really going to ask authors to put in some significant effort up front to put their proposal together. For anyone who has done projects with some other groups, including the Childhood Cancer Survivor Study, this is very similar to that, in that we want these to be well thought out so that once they're approved, we're really headed in a great direction to start momentum on that project early on, rather than then trying to figure out how we're going to actually tackle this issue. So the project concept proposal itself, again, you'll have the proposed title of the study. There may have been some additions or changes after the initial look or email to the chairs. This should really be a one-liner to give the sense of the project's scope. Again, the proposed author list or working group with disciplines and contact information. And this may be an opportunity for connection and collaboration with individuals outside our typical disciplines if it makes sense for this project. An authorship may not be guaranteed, but depends on contributions. And so we want people just to be aware of that as they agree to participate on these projects. We expect a background or rationale that would really look like 2 or 3 paragraphs and could either be incorporated or a complete introduction for a future paper. And then include specific aims with objectives and hypotheses. We need at least one of these that should be clear and concise. And this really is, what question are you trying to answer and what do you think that the answer is going to be? We also ask for some effort to be put forth in creating an analytic plan. So how are you going to actually accomplish this task? This does not need to be fully fleshed out. We recognize that many people don't have a biostatistics background and things like that. And so this is where sometimes the PAC leadership and other members can be helpful in this. But again, we want some thought of, how do you accomplish this? What steps do you need to take? What resources are needed? Who's going to be undertaking the analysis if there is one? Who are you studying? Are there clear and concise inclusion or exclusion criteria? And what information are you collecting? As part of this, we do ask that investigators actually create shell tables and figures so that we understand what information you're collecting. And this also really puts the investigator in an excellent place to pretty easily run with this concept after approval and get going very quickly, and hopefully shortening the timeline from inception to publication for many of these projects. And then lastly, any special considerations? Is there anything else we need to know? One thing that we hope that this project proposal is actually going to bring to the PAC is greater mentorship. We have heard before from members that people want to be involved in things, but kind of don't know how to start or don't know how to actually develop a research plan. And so in the initial request with the concept sort of idea in the is it a good fit process for people who want to participate and have requests about needing a mentor, that would be a great time to include that so that we can help set people up with a mentor within the PAC to help this process along and really help in the step-by-step process and building a concept proposal for those people who this may feel very unnatural for. And so we think that's actually going to be a great addition. Next slide. So this is the sort of prototype of the concept proposal cover page that we're hoping, once we sort of solidify this, that this will actually live on the website. So Mahmood will talk to you more about that later. But this really holds most of the same information I just sort of described on the previous slide about what is supposed to be included in the concept proposal. This will allow us a way to actually track these. So again, having the sort of key person that is submitting this study, all of the information we just discussed, most of it will be in a separate document, but this will allow us to track, the time of when we received this, the date that it moved on to the next step, did it receive final approval, and the final decision date, et cetera. So we hope to have a clear process for where this is going to live in the future. For now, if anyone is going to sort of undertake this process in the next round, until we have this up on the website, we are, Seth or myself or Lillian are happy to send this out to anyone who may need this and is interested in working on something that fulfills all this information. So that is going to be our new project proposal plan.
I wanted to comment. I think for many people that maybe are hearing this for the first time, this could feel like, wow, that's a lot, or it could be daunting, or it could be intimidating. And I felt the same way the first time. I totally felt the same way, like, oh my God, I don't even know how to start. The first time I did one of these, but this is probably the single thing that transformed my ability to do research. That I think Kari is 100% right, that all the things that they're sort of trying to coach you through, how to get your brain organized and how to get your project organized. If you do this at the get-go from the start, everything else will fall in place. It is transformative. And as Kari said, we are going to have mentors because we realize this is hard. And also Kari had talked about putting an example of this, because I think also it's sort of hard to know what on earth does this look like. So we were going to we were going to have an example on the website as well.
Yeah. So I intend on putting the AMH survey proposal that I know I wrote and actually used it to submit to the IRB at my home institution at the time, with shell tables, et cetera. We're hoping to get that published at the end of the summer, and then hopefully this will, along with the cover page and the other information, be on the website. But I'm happy to send that to anyone as well if they need any examples.
Okay, let's see what's next. Okay. Oh, this is just how to,
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to take a minute or two to see if there are questions? I think our breakout groups can be shorter, but does anyone have a question about that they want to ask Kari before we move on to the rest of the reports? Wow, Kari, you must have been pretty clear.
Either clear or no one's ever going to submit a project proposal.
That's what I'm afraid of. But please don't be afraid of this. That's why we have that big blue mentor star there. We are serious about helping you through writing this concept. Absolutely, 100%. Okay. Then I'm going to keep going.
All right, this is still me. So this is just to update everybody on the other projects that we have ongoing. And we, again, are separating this into the clinical practice projects that we are sort of calling PAC endorsed projects, and then also the umbrella projects that we have ongoing, or things that are sort of in a holding pattern. So our AMH survey paper, which is really to survey the Oncofertility Consortium pediatric PAC members and how they use AMH, that is very close to being on its way to submission. We are waiting for some final author edits before undergoing one more revision and hoping that that will then be ready for submission at that point for publication. Paired with that was the AMH literature review, and that was just submitted to JAYAO just a couple weeks ago, and we're waiting to hear back from that and hoping to have a positive result. So more to come. Hopefully that will be well published by the time we get to our Oncofertility Consortium meeting in November. And then following these two projects, one thing that we've had sort of waiting in the wings is the Delphi panel on AMH. So recommendations and really rigorous consideration of how we should be using AMH in the survivorship population. And that is planned to be led by both Lena Nahata and Julie Rios, and we're really waiting for these other two projects to be complete and sort of off our table before that really starts getting going. And then from last year, our meeting in November, the project that came out of that, and that's sort of a continuation of all this other work on AMH, is really what we call sort of the REI project. So Jenia and Miriam have been leading this work, really investigating how reproductive endocrinologists approach survivors in this population, recognizing that many of them may not be part of this group and may not have that sort of intimate connection to pediatric cancer and survivorship and oncofertility. So how, when they are getting our patients in the community in later years, how are they counseling those patients? So that concept is complete. And I think Jenny is someone who could also field some questions about a concept. She was asked to write one. And we're working on sort of finalizing the plan on survey distribution. So hoping to have that out later this fall. And then probably in Q1 of 2025, we'll really be working on collating the data analysis, and hopefully planning to have that published by Q2 or Q3 of next year. So those are the active sort of PAC clinically endorsed projects. Other projects that are ongoing is first a project led by James Klosky looking at third-party reproduction considerations. This is really bringing to light the issue of this is something we don't always discuss with pediatric patients at the time of fertility preservation, but brings up some interesting points of things to consider, sort of tips and pitfalls of dealing with these issues in these populations. And the goal really here is education and bringing awareness to this subject. And then secondly, Also at the last OFC meeting, we had some discussion within the clinical practice group about clinical conundrums. We all know that there are cases that we've been involved in that are really challenging to think through and don't necessarily always have the one specific answer, but how can we collate a couple of these clinical conundrums that may be illustrative for how not just all of us who do this every day, sort of think about how to approach these patients and to think through these issues. But as for other groups or other institutions that maybe are not nearly as sort of immersed or enmeshed in this group, a framework that they could use as well. The idea that we had after that meeting was this would be a great time to actually collaborate with the education committee on a joint effort, potentially even for a webinar and maybe even sort of a debate style panel of how we think through these patients. We're hoping to get some of these other projects sort of farther along and off our plate before moving on to that project, but that's one that we're actually very excited about and probably will be asking many of you for ideas for cases in the future.
Thank you, Kari. That was a lot, but we wanted people to be aware of things that we were thinking about and directions that we were moving. So if you want to know more about that, then you can go to the clinical practice breakout group. But I'm going to switch gears now and go to the research subcommittee, which Maggie Dwiggins will present.
I think Maggie just said her computer crashed. So if Leslie is able to go first, she's trying to log back on.
Okay. All right. Let me close your eyes. You're going to get a preview. Okay. Let's go to the education subcommittee. And this is chaired by Holly, Anthony, and Allison.
All right, perfect. So we kind of have twofold, like Lillian has noted in her previous slides, of projects that we're working on now. So one is to increase education to the PAC group and the rest of the Oncofertility Consortium at large. So a series of hopefully 3 webinars annually on different topics. So we have completed 2 thus far. So in February, we did a webinar on the results of the ovarian tissue cryopreservation provider survey. So for those of you who completed that survey, we went over some of the results and sort of talked through things that we expected and didn't expect to find there. And that webinar is available for on the YouTube page. And then just recently, yesterday, we had the webinar on overcoming barriers to fertility preservation in pediatric and adolescent populations. And Anthony, I think you're on now. Did you want to touch on that one at all?
Thank you. So we conducted this yesterday between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. Eastern. And we had about 20, varying between 23 and 26 participants. It was a very interesting session that we had at least several members from international community involved, myself, members Lockhart Barbara and Maria from the USA, and Natalie and Dana Tillman from Uruguay. It was well attended, and we tried to look at different perspectives regarding cultural and language barriers. And the most interesting part of the session was the perspectives of interpreters and what is required of interpreters, especially in the context of fertility preservation in pediatric and adolescent population. So it was really an interesting one. We had some good questions coming in terms of resources and where one can find this kind of resources regarding use criteria to engage interpreters or how to handle situations that make clinicians very uncomfortable. So it went well. Thank you.
Great, you can go to the next slide. And then we have one further, and I forgot to mention, out of the webinars, our goal is to do one international webinar per season, which would be the webinar that Anthony just discussed, just to make sure we're applying reach for everyone in the consortium. And then we have one further webinar with date to be determined, but looking towards topics in survivorship, and the authors will be working towards that over the next couple of months. You can go to the next slide.
That's the next one.
Oh, that is the next one. Oh, I thought we had one on the thing. So then the other thing that we're working on is the library, which is what we will be spending our breakout time discussing. So our goal is to make the pediatric of the Oncofertility Consortium website a little more user-friendly. And that if you are coming to the website looking for certain material, whether it be for research or for patient education or for, you know, some examples of protocols to be able to grow and develop the program, that we can put them in a place that is a little more accessible and easy to view. So that would be taking a lot of the great material that already exists on the website and just putting it in a different location under a different format, but also bringing in materials that people may have at their own institutions or at outside websites that, you know, we have used and have found to be helpful, that we can allow everybody to have a simple place to be able to look at that. So we'll go over that more in the breakout session, and anyone who's interested in helping with that, please pop in.
So is Maggie back? Oh, this is
Yes.
great. Okay, I'm backing up for you, Maggie.
Okay. Sorry,
Okay.
my audio stopped and then it just like crashed my whole situation. So here we go.
Here we go.
Yay. Okay. Well, as far as the research subcommittee goes, we also have a really nice webinar that kind of goes with the first topic here that you can see. So the ovarian tissue resources collaboration is really quite exciting. And what is going on is there are a number of people involved in tissue research across the country, and they've been doing a lot of really good basic science on this tissue that we've collected over the years. And so the webinar really touches on that. You can see the link here, but the title of it was let's see, the human ovarian tissue collection and research priorities. And so basically what it was just an introduction to all these labs that are contributing to the research, what they're doing. For example, there's the Laronde lab, who's mapping the ovaries and trying to create a standard model for what ovarian tissue really should look like in the peripubertal and pubertal, early pubertal stages. And then translating this into research. Northwestern has collected a tissue library as well. We're collaborating with Pittsburgh 2 for tissue samples to be shipped to the NIH. And it's some really exciting research opportunities. And what we would like kind of to talk about is what the priorities for research might be on these tissue, to see if there's anybody that has ideas or who wants to collaborate kind of moving forward. So that's that first kind of PAC supported basic science research that's going on. And then we as well kind of feel like there's a role of mentorship as well within this committee. So what we've tried to do is kind of coordinate and collaborate on individual research. And so there are some people that have reached out and said, this is some research that I think would be really interesting to do. How can we support that research? How can we connect people with one another as well? And so the two ongoing projects are the assessment of the cohort who are electing to pursue fertility preservation. And we're using demographics as surrogate markers to kind of make a comment on what types of patients are actually going through fertility preservation. And then one that's also kind of in the pipelines is surgical techniques for ovarian tissue preservation as well. That's it. I think Tyler's going to talk more about this, or Leslie.
Sure, I can talk. So I can talk a little bit about the work in partnership with the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons, also known as Data for the Common Good, to build out a international data commons for reproductive health outcomes and preservation evaluation, which we've called the Reproductive Hope Collaborative. So over the last year, next slide, we have really spent a majority of our time working on the MOU. So this is just an overview of all the different groups that are a part of the PCDC. You can see that there's actually 2 more that are should likely be updated to this group. But we are currently at a few really important phases of this work. One is we've got engaged stakeholders. The second part is the consortium MOU. So mainly what we've been doing on is working on a memorandum of understanding, getting into agreement amongst ourselves, then sending it off to our institutions to get approval that they will sign it. And the next step is to go ahead and move on to signing the MOU. So the other work that's been ongoing has been the data dictionary work as well. So the group focusing specifically on just oncology specific details has met, I think, 4 times to discuss what data elements that we want to capture and in what format we want to capture them as it relates to oncology specific data, treatment exposure data. And so that's where we're at. So hopefully by the end of this month or early August, we'll be sending out our MOUs to all of our sites to sign off. Currently, right now, we're locked. No further sites that haven't been involved can join on this MOU for various reasons of how complicated it is and how it delays things. But we made real progress. Here's a list of some of the contributors, and we can remove some of the question marks here, but we have many groups on this call. And again, really what's been a limiting factor is getting contact from individuals that their site, they have an identified person who will, on a legal team that's reviewed the MOU and is willing to sign off on it and doesn't have any edits. So we're hopeful to move forward with that very shortly.
Thank you all very much. I hope you guys people who are on the group can see that these committees have been doing a lot of work since November, and I'm really so grateful for everything that you guys have put together and for pulling together these slides for today. So I think we can take are there any questions out there before we go into breakout groups? You can raise your hand, you can unmute and ask. Okay. If not, I want to mention this slide, and then I will tell you how to go to a breakout group. So I just want to put out a plug for the Oncofertility meeting, which is going to be November 11th through the 13th. You've probably gotten things from Mahmood about registering for the meeting and booking your hotel room. The PAC will meet on Monday, the first day of the meeting, from 10 to 12. Abstracts, I think, are due maybe August 14th, somewhere around there.
August 12th.
12th. Oh, 2 days earlier than I thought. Okay, so please look to submit an abstract if you are interested.